Well, good afternoon. Welcome, friends, family, lovers of our Sally. In this time, we are going to gather together and share memories, embarrassing stories, inspirational words, but mostly we're going to be sharing love. The love that we knew embodied in that person named Sally Miller Gearhart, and the love that we've grown to understand in ourselves as a result of that honor, privilege, and joy. We're going to be filming today, as you know, so hopefully that's all right. If it's not all right, just make sure you keep your mask on and you look like anybody else wearing a mask. Now, before we get going, however, I want us just to gather together. Let's take a deep breath in and center ourselves as we let it out. Let's be here with one another and the grand memories of our inimitable Sally. And I begin this morning by offering the final four stanzas of T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets. Now, as you, many of you also knew Jane, Sally's partner in life in so many ways. And Jane and Sally memorized this poem, and the words rang out as they spoke and sang it together while they were walking Franny through the woods. With the drawing of this love and the voice of this calling, we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Through the unknown, remembered gate, when the last of earth left to discover is that which was the beginning. At the source of the longest river, the voice of the hidden waterfall, and the children in the apple tree, not known, because not looked for, but heard, half heard, in the stillness between two waves of the sea. Quick now, here, now, always, a condition of complete simplicity, costing not less than everything. And all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, when the tongues of flames are enfolded into the crowned knot of fire, and the fire and the rose are one.
Good afternoon. My name is Jade, and I am co-emceeing with Ruth here. And we just wanted to welcome you, tell you that there are no programs, but what you will be hearing today will be speeches, as was shared so beautifully, memories, maybe some embarrassing stories, some songs. Do stick around because the film crew will be recording some lines from the Wonderground. It is asking folks to read lines from the Wonderground that will be collaged together as part of the film project. So, and you'll hear more about that later as well.
Hi, and I'm Ruth. I met Sally 50 years ago last April. I remember it well. And I want to first introduce Jean to talk to us. And Jean Crosby was, when I moved to San Francisco in 1971, Jean and Sally were this dynamo couple. They were like the movers and shakers of the entire Bay Area. And Jean also became the land partner for Sally.
Oh my gosh. I wasn't expecting that. Can I take this off? Okay. Hi. I'm Jean Crosby, and I met Sally in San Francisco, and we were lovers, partners for 6 years when I was a baby. During that time, we and 2 other women, all based in San Francisco, decided to buy land. Inspired by the burgeoning women's Back to the Land movement, Peggy's desire to do sustainable small-scale farming, and Sally's fantasies of an almost women-only society. Though it was initially Peggy's idea, Sally was the driving force, the vision of a community of women. We began searching for possibilities, and due to high land prices, found ourselves looking farther and farther away from San Francisco. When we learned of a piece of land outside Willits, we all came up to visit and instantly fell in love with the mostly forested parcel with a substantial meadow for growing food, to be known henceforth by us as Baytree Land, or the land. Sometime later, Sally became lovers and partners with Jane, who took up residence next door. Their relationship lasted many years, and they were kindred spirits for the rest of their lives. In the end, there were 8 or 10 of us in the community and connected to many in the Willits area. Some of you might wonder why it was Sally's wish that, upon her death, folks would be encouraged to contribute to the Humane Society. There's a bucket over there and information if you want to make a more substantial contribution. Sally's attachment to animals was deeply felt. Stray cats and neighborhood dogs would find their way to her cabin and stay forever. And even a bear would happily stay days rather than forever. But that is a story for another time. I'm going to read something Sally wrote soon after the death of her beloved pit bull, Sirius. Quote, this is to a friend of hers who was very supportive of her in this time of her grief. Franny, my other dog, has stepped up to the plate, moving in to fill some of the void. She says, I'm still good to go on the care front. You are completely covered. Let me know if you need anything extra. It's as if she just squeezed a little closer into my aura. I've never thought of Sirius as in any way taking care of me, but maybe he was doing that all along, like a bodyguard. Are dogs bodyguards? Presente and Franklin Hodge, cats, have both come under my hand for their stroking every hour or so, like Franny, reminding me that all is well. Then they close their eyes and sprawl in the sunshine. Sunshine, sunshine in the snow. The birds, oh, the birds, the deer, the spiders, the ticks, the moths, all are making visible little supportive motions. Humans need such blatant clues, they seem to say to each other as they roll their eyes heavenward. You practically have to shout your message to them or write Sirius's name in 3-feet-high letters across the floor of the sky or the web or whatever, just to let them know you're bringing them love from their dear departed boy. Jane also misses the big galoot, as she called him. Actually, her favorite loving term for him has been the thug. She's quite devastated and extra generous in her care for me. We went to the meeting party we'd both been looking forward to last evening, and Jane quietly passed the word around that I'd lost one of the longest and deepest lovers. I got some quiet hugs. I got tons of quiet hugs. The day Sally passed on, I visited her in the afternoon. She was very unresponsive, and it was so hard. To my amazement, so I sang her a song from my teaching days, which some of you might know. I love you, you love me, we're a happy family. And to my amazement and delight, she lit up, and I felt the connection we had had for all those 50 plus years, joyful and celebratory. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Next up, we'll hear from Bill Barksdale, a longtime Willits friend of Sally's and a member of the Shirleys and the Burleys. We can figure out who Bill identifies as.
I was a Burley. So it's kind of windy today, so my speech could be shorter if a breeze picks up. My husband and I, Joe, are married today because of courageous pioneers like Sally Miller Gearhart, Harvey Milk, Jim Geary, my friend who started the Shanti Project in San Francisco where I worked for a while. When I think of what I'm grateful for, I think of them. I remember I stood in a crowd of a few thousand angry queers and other friends in front of San Francisco City Hall all those years ago on what became known as the White Knight Riot, after that sad, misguided assassin, Dan White, was sentenced to just 5 years in prison after methodically murdering Mayor George Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk. I could see police cars exploding in flames at the corner of McAllister and Polk Street as sirens screamed. Their blazes were a metaphor for the rage of all of us there, gay and straight, who needed to let the world know and feel our outrage and our terrible pain. Years later, as I was talking with Sally one day about that night, she confessed to me that she was one of those people rolling over the police cars and setting them on fire. Sally could be a warrior when she needed to be. That was part of her. She also had the tremendous caring of a best friend and the innocent audacity of the Thoreau's fool, stepping off into the unknown, not always sure where she would end up, but wanting the adventure. She was always hungry, it seemed to me, to learn and to grow. She stood shoulder to shoulder with our dear Harvey Milk, unafraid to lead, to defeat the Briggs Initiative that misguided man tried to ban non-heterosexual teachers from the classroom. And he lost thanks to their efforts. Yeah. Sally loved animals and the forest where she lived. She loved women, and in my experience, she reached out to all people. I'm here today because Sally invited me. She welcomed me as a friend, always calling me Mr. Barksdale, with sarcastic laugh and that smile, that famous smile. I don't know what Sally's legacy will be. That's still unfolding. I'm sure she won't be remembered as a lady, even though her favorite default character to play when we did improv theater games was to play the Southern Belle. Somewhere deep inside, that was Sally too. She reminded me once that she had been, and she said this really loud, separatist lesbian, which is how the New York Times remembered her recently. I never experienced that part. I knew her as a friend to discuss spiritual philosophy with, to share meals with, to play games with, or just sit and chat. She was an academic, unlike me. She was always the most flexible one in yoga class, a contortionist. She would bring her beloved dog Bodhi, who would visit each one of us by plopping down on our mats when we were trying to balance on one foot, or curl up to whomever he chose as we lay on the floor. Sally would call to him loudly and annoyingly and apologize loudly while we were trying to relax. This was a weekly event. All of us loved Bodhi, and we enjoyed his affection. Bodhi's favorite food was the upholstery in Sally's SUV. She happily drove it around, sitting on just the springs and metal frames, which was all that was left of the interior of her car. After yoga, a few of us would go to Ardella's for breakfast. Too often, Sally, along with Emmy Good and Marilyn McNair, would recall some silly childhood song, and the three of them would belt it out, silencing the other diners as I slid as far down in my seat as I could possibly be, trying to disappear as the people stared at us. She had an almost perverse fondness for men's legs. And when a guy in shorts would pass by, she had to remark loudly, "Look at those great legs. Mmm." Her favorite and only breakfast at Ardella's was Sally Cakes. Sally Cakes was a plate heaped with small child-sized pancakes, literally flooded with melted butter, and buried in a mountain of powdered sugar, her favorite food group. She never had to order. When she walked through the door, a server would just yell to the kitchen, "Sally's here!" And within minutes, that dripping plate of artery-choking sludge would appear to her delight. When she was still teaching at USF, she once asked me for any books I had on channeling, knowing that I have a large library on occult and religious matters. She informed me that she was planning to incorporate channeling of spirits into her course at USF somehow. I don't know how she did it, but Sally was always opening doors. The more taboo, the wider she opened the door. That was her way. She was adventurous and daring, an explorer, and beneath all of it, a river of love. I last saw Sally at her 90th birthday party at her cabin in the forest. She was welcoming and warm and very tired. When she passed out of this physical life a few weeks later, I was teary-eyed for a moment, but ultimately I felt happy for her as I imagined her reunited with dearest Jane Gurko, the two of them embracing, laughing. Sally's aged body had finished its work and she passed on to whatever comes next. Pure positive energy, as Esther Hicks would say. That was the belief we shared. Sally grabbed onto and treasured life. She loved her privacy, yet she shared herself with the world. She left the world a better place than she found it. I'm sure Sally often spoke these words and won't be offended if I say goodbye to her with Horatio's blessing to his friend Hamlet. Good night, sweet prince, and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest. Dearest Sally, like you're driving, it was a wild ride. Thanks for the lift. Thank you.
I just want to say to Jean, Sally brightened up when she sang. When I sang to her, which I also did, she would go, and then place her hand on me. So, next, Susan Leo is going to read a letter sent to us from Dorothy Hacker. Susan?
So Dorothy Hacker has known from when she was 18 years old, and many years have passed since then. And Dorothy lives in San Antonio, and that's where Morgaine lives now as well. And Dorothy asked if I would be so kind as to read this for her. So try to imagine a really wonderful Texas drawl here, okay? I won't even try. On a Friday afternoon in the early fall of 1961, my 18-year-old university freshman self sat in the back of the theater at Texas Lutheran College, preparing to watch my beloved high school friend rehearse a play. I was not prepared for what was about to happen. Onto the stage strode the director of the play, the legendary Dr. Sally. This woman parted the air in 3-inch black patent leather heels, red lipstick, gesticulating hands, and wild black hair. And then there was her voice. This was the beginning of my 60-year journey with Sally Gearhart, whom, as is true of so many of us, I fell in love with at first sight. I was to discover that this early Sally was a card-carrying Christian and a devotee of Ayn Rand. There was an afternoon during a closeted lesbian and gay party held at a private home when Sally and I argued for hours over these things. She was flabbergasted when she realized I was holding my own in our debate. And I think this might have been the moment when she began taking me seriously. I, of course, did not want to be taken seriously unless it was to be taken seriously to bed. And we finally did that too. Out of those transforming encounters came our beginning in what was to become the lesbian feminist experience. We left the old definitions of ourselves behind and traveled into a space where women could love and empower themselves and each other. And we could begin to reimagine and recreate the world. I remember a May in 1968 when Sally and I sat in her double-wide trailer on the Guadalupe River, covered with poison ivy, and read the entire trilogy of The Lord of the Rings to each other. I will never forget her rendition of Gollum, nor her radiance as Galadriel. During this time, I also learned of Sally's prodigious store of poems and lines from the great plays she had studied in her youth. She could recite the longest verses word for word and take on any character, bringing her or him to life. In those early years, being separated was a tribulation. So we would set out on a Friday afternoon, I from Lawrence, Kansas, Sally from Seguin, Texas, and we would drive for hours to meet at the Star Motel in Pauls Valley, Oklahoma. This was before Chris Williamson wrote that song about thunder shaking the roof of her car as she drives through the desert for you, right? Well, when the song came out, Dorothy could totally relate. Now, in 1970, I got a job at Chico State College, and Sally had to decide if she would continue her celebrated career at TLC, that TLC, Texas Lutheran College, or leave it all for an undiscovered country. She made the absolutely courageous and life-changing decision to be reborn in San Francisco, and the rest, as they say, is history. Thank you, Bill, wherever you got to. I traveled down the highway every weekend to be part of the women's and lesbian feminist movements exploding in the Bay Area. Sally's energy and ideas lit the fires that burned in our hearts and heads, reducing patriarchal notions to ashes and generating the phoenix of feminist thinking and activism. During these years, Sally spoke at mass demonstrations, helped Harvey defeat the Briggs Initiative, edited the first book on gay liberation and the church, wrote articles with titles like The Future, If There Is One, Is Female, and channeled her first visionary novel, The Wanderground. Once Sally moved to the land, she became even more an elemental force and warrior of nature. She lived her passionate belief that there was no human, animal, plant, or mineral that she could not communicate with. I learned the names of her many and best-loved canine and feline companions. I watched her commune with spiders. I listened to her rave over the cutting of trees. Her life's mission, it seemed to me, was to recognize the presence of violence in all its forms and envision its end. In the 90s, Sally began writing her magnum opus. Its working title was Little Blue. It was a global vision of a world led by women with an economy that made poverty impossible, a government that gave everyone a voice, and peacekeepers who actually did just that. But it was not a utopian fantasy. There were profound disagreements and conflicts and even violence. Sally showed how they were faced and resolved in ways she believed were utterly possible for us. I loved nothing more in my life than the hours we spent talking about the people and ideas that lived within the pages of this manuscript. 40 years before her death, Sally previsioned something like this day. It comes in the final chapter of The Wanderground, entitled The Telling of the Days of Artelidia. Artelidia was one of the oldest of the hill women, having originally come from the city to the hill women, to the Wanderground, to create a society of women who, among many other marvelous things, had learned to fly. Artelidia announced the day of her death and asked everyone to gather and celebrate her passing. It was a day of singing, dancing, drumming, storytelling, laughing, crying, thanking, remembering. At the day's end, Archeladia said to her beloved community, "What is the task? To work as if the earth, the mother, can be saved. To work as if our healing care were not too late. Yours is the task then, mine is the passing. And although I may not come again." And with these words, she slowly breathed herself away, and everyone knew they were better for every minute they had spent with her. While Sally departed in her hard self before we gathered, here we are, to celebrate this best beloved woman and her stunning contributions to our lives. Go well, beloved, and come again. Now, following this piece is from perhaps Sally's first lover, is words from Sally's last lover. Christine Cole writes from Belgium. She sends these words. Words. With Sally, everything resided in words. The power of words to express, to explore, to entice, to incite, to teach, and to reach. I met her through words 25 years before our bodies would ever meet. When word is out and their wander ground helped to shape my sense of self. It was words again which drew us together through an initially tentative and finally downright bold correspondence. This correspondence, and it was indeed a co-respondence, led to her introduction to Paris, Brussels, London, Rome, Venice, Florence, Sheringham, and to our rediscovery of Arkansas, Texas, and California. Her transformation of my life as her friend and her lover evolved as we wove an amazing tapestry of words. She challenged me at every level and supported me as we soared together, falling in love again and ever again with each other, and the power of teaching and music and poetry and theater and, yes, sheer lust. Sally was dazzlingly beautiful at every stage of her life. I saw the love that she elicited in others, her friends, my mother, my students, and strangers in the supermarket parking lot, and did my best to reflect that love and deserve it. Sally did nothing by halves, and although I never sat in her classroom, I learned more from her about fully embracing life and its contradictions than any other could have taught. I knew she'd always catch me if I fell, and she was outrageously herself in a way that permitted, in fact, demanded my selfhood. I have many gifts from Sally that I will cherish, but the ones that will last longest are the ones we all share. Her amazing power to use words to imagine and engender change. Her books, her ideas, her insistence that there is a more tolerant and loving way of being. In my fortunate case, this includes her thousands of pages of letters. Her words. I invite you each and all to take a moment to remember the most important word for Sally, the word and the idea at the center of creation. A word we've already heard several times this morning is love. That's her true memorial. She says, that's what I have for now. My heart is full. It's chucking down rain here. I have a grieving cat to cuddle, and I want to know if you think this is okay. It's okay.
That's so cool. to hear a person's life through the eyes of so many. Next up is Esther Faber, who will be singing the Whiffin' Poof.
Hello, everybody. Hello, fellow lovers of Sally. I lived about a block away from Sally on what was really Wonderground. We called it Baytreeland. And Sally and I would often take walks together, long walks in the redwoods. And like one of the speakers said, we'd be in the midst of the redwoods with our dogs, and then all of a sudden she would recite a poem that would go on for a long, long time, probably pages, verbatim, bellowed it right in the woods, you can imagine it. And I was always awed by that. But mostly, I was taken by Sally for her openness to everyone, to animals, to plants, and to me. And I met her, I think it was about 1992, when I moved up there, up in Baytreeland. And I cherished every time I could be with her. Every time I'd come to her house, she would always offer me her chair that she was sitting on. Yeah. And wanted to know if I wanted anything to drink or eat. Of course, pretty much all she had were these little animal crackers, and then Oreo cookies that she only would eat the cream out of, and Cokes. So anyway. Pepsi, oh, pardon me. Pepsi. I got that one. I never even looked at the thing, but it was Pepsi. And all I felt was just grateful and glad to be with her. Sometimes she'd bring her garbage down to where I had my office in Willits. And I'd be out there sometimes doing something on the lawn, and she'd greet me, and she'd give me one of those hugs like this. And I was looking around to see who. But I was always so glad and so happy to be with her. The last time I saw her was when she was in the care home. But the time before that, I visited her in March, and I came there with my son and Ann McDonald, my son David Post and Ann McDonald, and we were just visiting with her quietly. She was eating her cream out of her Oreo cookies, and I just felt I wanted to sing to her. So I sang this one song, and David and Ann, who are both singers, chimed in harmony with me. And I'm going to sing it. She asked me at the very end of the song, she said, sing it at my memorial. I was just like, whoa, okay. And I told that to Vivian, who organized a lot of this, and here I am. So I'm inviting you to sing also. I'll sing it a couple times. It's a song that was written, I believe, during World War I, and it was, I think, about a squadron of pilots back then, and it became well known because I think there are 4 men that sang it from, I think, Yale, the Whiffin' Poof group, and they kept that going every year, and it's probably still being sung by them. I looked it up online, and I saw that it had been sung by almost just so many famous singers. So please join me, and if you like to harmonize, please do. Here we go. From the tables down at Sally's, whoops, I'm going to change the word. From the tables down at Brick House to the place that Sally dwelt, to the dear Senatchee pub she loved so well. Sing the Whiffenpoofs assembled, with their glasses raised on high, and the magic of their singing casts its spell. Come on, sing. Yes, the magic of their singing, of the song we love so well, shall I wasting and memoring and the rest. We will celebrate our Sally while life and love may last. Then we'll pass and be forgotten with the rest. We're poor little lambs who have lost our way. Ba, ba, ba. We're little black sheep who have gone astray. Ba, ba, ba. This is the Sally, wherever you are. Gentle songsters off on a spree, doomed from here to eternity. Lord, have mercy on such as we. Ba, ba, ba. One more time. From the tables down at Brick House, to the place where Sally dwelt, to the dear Shanachi pub she loved so well. Sing the Whiffenpoofs assembled, with their glasses raised on high, and the magic of their singing casts its spell. Yes, the magic of their singing, of the songs we love so well, shall I wasting and devouring and the rest. We will celebrate our Sally while life and love may last. Then we'll pass and be forgotten with the rest. We're poor little lambs who have lost our way. Ba, ba, ba. We're little black sheep who have gone astray. Ba, ba, ba. Gentle songsters off on a spree, doomed from here to eternity. Lord, have mercy on such as we. Ba, ba, ba. That's all for you, Sally.
You've all met Susan Leo already, but now I'm going to introduce her. She is Reverend Dr. Susan Leo, ordained in the United Church of Christ. She's been friends with Sally for almost 50 years, and Sally had a great attraction for pulpits, you might have noticed. She really longed to preach, and she got to preach at Susan's ordination, so that's pretty special. Susan is also Sally's most next door person, right next door on the land. So, Susan?
I feel like I'm spending half my life up here. So I live next door to Sally. I lived next door to Sally because she asked me to buy the land next door to her. And then Jane became my land partner. And then she had the audacity to die. And so then now my wife is now my land partner. And Jane is in my heart and in our garden, and so is Sally. So I'm going to talk briefly because there's something else we're going to do, but I want to do this together. Sally Gearhart loved women. What? Animals, right. Macaroni and cheese. Nature. Dancing. Oh God, yes. Aikido. Crackers, right.
Singing.
How about potted meat products? Do you remember those? Oh my God. How about Pepsi, right? Pepsi. Trees. Oh my gosh. Oh my God. Yes, all of these things, trees. She also loved the city of Willits. She just loved all the people here. It was breathtaking. I guess that's why they ended up really settling so much here in Willits, was as a result of just falling in love with the people too. She loved the people. She loved the natural world, the communing with the spiders and the ticks, and was like, dear God, Sally, will you just kill that tick? No, Leo. And she would take it outside where the dog, Franny, or somebody would find it and bring it back in. Well, we all, Sally Gearhart, and I'm surprised nobody we haven't said this before, we all felt like we were Sally's best friend, didn't we? Right? And we all felt like we were Sally's best friend because we were drawn into that bubble of Sally. When she looks at you and she leans over and she's like, darling, how are you? And tell me about yourself, and what are you doing now to change the world? It was always something so magnificent about the way she could do that to me, and I saw her do it to everybody, a stranger. She would just draw them in, and you knew that you were just about the most special person in the world, at least in that moment. And because she was so generous with her love and attention, many of us here don't know the half of who she loved. Okay? So I'm looking out, I'm just meeting people for the first time that I've been hearing the names of for years and years. Because they're we all are in different orbits around Sally, right? So I entreat you to, after this, introduce yourself to a stranger and find out why they and why you were so special to Sally. That would be a great gift to each other. Sienna, why don't you come on up while I finish this? So it's a great joy to be here and to also be able to, in this next moment, hear Sally's voice again. Sienna.
Hello, everybody. Sally loved, as you all know, poetry, and I was able to record a lot of incredible poems. And the one that I passed out, The Truly Great, I have a recording of, and it was done down at the Roots restaurant. So there is some background noise that you'll hear. But before I do that, I want to say that Sally is one of the truly great. And she was able to maintain that brilliance because of the incredible caregivers that she had, who were with her 24 hours a day, who were with her during her dementia, during her losing of the words. It's the caregivers, thank you, All of you. So, just I guess I'll look at you if it's not coming through. I hope it does, because part of it, when Sally would lose part of the words of the poem, she would conjure up the meaning of it, and she would substitute the words. So here's, which we've passed around. If you don't have a copy, I think OSHA's got extra copies of this poem, so you can, if you can't quite hear the recording, then you could follow along. Are we ready?
I think continually of those who were truly great, who from the womb remembered the soul's history through corridors of light, where the hours are suns, endless and singing, whose lovely ambition was that their lips, still touched with fire, might sing of the spirit, clothed from head to foot in song, and who hoarded from the spring branches the desires falling across their bodies like blossoms. What is precious is never to forget the essential delight of the blood, drawn from ageless springs and dropping through earth, dropping through something on this earth, never to deny its pleasure in the morning's simple light or its grave evening desire for love, never to allow gradually the traffic to smother with noise and with fog the flowering of the spirit. Near the skull, near the sun, in the highest field, see how these names are faded by the wavering grass and by the streamers of white cloud and whispers of wind in a listening sky, the names of those who in their lives fought for life, who were at their hearts the fire's center. Born of the sun, they traveled a brief while toward the sun, and they left the vivid air signed with their honor. Isn't that a dynamite one?
Yes, it is. That voice! That voice. Don't forget your voice.
What a special gift to hear Sally. And you know, always inspired to memorize poems. People don't do that anymore. Next up, we'll hear from Margie Hawthorne, a local Willits friend of Sally's.
I first met Sally when we were both taking a yoga class out at the old health club many moons ago. I was amazed at how flexible she was for someone her age, and I always enjoyed talking with her in each class. It soon became apparent that we really enjoyed talking about things and how we both thought the world was going to hell in a handbasket, so I invited Sally over for lunch, expecting that she would be very health conscious. I prepared a healthy lunch with lots of fruit and veggies. Much to my dismay, she brought a paper bag and she said, "Honey," and she always called me honey, "I have very specific food preferences, so I always bring my own meal." Then she proceeded to haul out 2 packages of Twinkies and a Pepsi. So much for my health-conscious friend. We would have the most interesting discussions because Sally was very definitely liberal and I was very definitely conservative. But through the years, we both concluded that our friendship had brought us to a more moderate way of thinking. And if we could ever get elected, we could save the world according to Sally and Margie. The one thing we never solved, though, was which one of us would be president and which one would be vice president. One time we were at the grocery store, and she was on her way to Emmendale Corral practice. And I said, you know, I'd really love to join and sing with them, but I don't really think they'd want me to join because I'm a Republican. And I'm not sure they have any in their group. And she said, honey, you come with me right now and go to practice with me, because every group should have a token Republican. And so it was. That was one more common ground that we found. Another thing we decided was that so many times people make judgments based on perceptions, and so many times perceptions are not the reality. That to really make a difference, one has to keep an open mind and not be afraid to admit that maybe they were wrong about something and that maybe their belief system was only based on a one-sided opinion without ever having explored the other side. At one point, Sally told me that she had subscribed to Ms. Magazine and I should be getting it in the mail anytime. Now, Ms. Magazine was probably the last magazine that I would have ever thought about reading. So I said, okay, Sally, I'll read it. But you have to read the book I'm just finishing that is just wonderful. It's Ronald Reagan's book of letters that he had written to various people during his time in office. It gave a very moving insight into how he thought and how much he cared about people. Sally sort of gasped when I said it, and she said, okay, honey, I'll read it, but only when I'm sitting on the toilet. We both learned a lot from that experience, and it broadened our horizons considerably. The thing I appreciated the most about Sally is we laughed a lot, and we wrestled with solutions to problems. We were both activists in our own way, she being the devoted feminist, and me thinking I wasn't one until she made me think about that statement. I was a devoted activist for small business owners, but the bottom line is we both cared a lot about our society and the direction it was headed. I will really miss her. She was one of a kind, a bright, engaged, caring woman who made the world a better place.
Thank you, Marjorie. Next, we're going to hear from Corky Wick, who started out as a student of Sally's in speech at San Francisco State University, ended up teaching with her in the Department of Speech and Communications. She's going to talk about the 70s.
Well, I have to start with the best story first, which is a dream I had of Sally. And of course, she was up a tree, and I so much wanted to be with her. So I flew up and had an orgasm on the way. So, the best. My dearest darling teacher, who changed my life forever, died July 14th, 2021. Dearest, darling, utterly generous, peanut butter eating Sally Gearhart with light coming out of her head is no more on this earth with us, but somewhere else with her flying women roaming clouds among the science fiction lands. I first met her in her butch presence when she was wearing black boots, black pants, a white shirt under a classic vest. She let me enroll in an over-enrolled class. This was at San Francisco State University that was known for experimental things, and it was called The Block. I don't know if anybody here was in that class. Bonnie, I don't think you were in that class. Nobody, just me. You were? You heard of it. Anyway, so it was an English class taught by Jane Gergel, a philosophy class taught by Gretchen Milne, also known as Forrest, and of course Sally teaching the speech class. So it was fabulous. It was just so wonderful. You know, this was in the 70s at San Francisco State. It was certainly a time of breathing in the air of feminism and talk about the patriarchy. And we knew who the enemy was, the administration, not the women teachers. So, well, we fell in love with all of our teachers, and I have to name them, so some of you know these people, but of course Sally, Lanny Silver, Jane Gurko, Mina Caulfield, Angela Davis, Rachel Conhut, and our physical education professors Bobby Bennett and Eula West, Mary Felstener, Cherie Moraga, Dorothy Hacker, Chino Sole, Debbie Rosenfeld. I'm sure of, and Ruth Mahaney was also part of that program. So, and our greatest leader and teacher was Dean Nancy McDermott, who did the smallest things like return students' wallets, and the biggest things like starting programs that went on forever and ever. So, well, if love is perfect, that was Sally and her amigas, las profesoras. Among a lot of the committed students of all sizes and ages, my friends Lanika Ahumanu Robinson, Bonnie Gordon, and many other students began to change themselves and the world by being women's studies majors. And as Sally often said, before feminism, I couldn't spit over my chin. After feminism, I could. So in the speech and communication department, she taught many of us, and her classes were basic feminism, the rhetoric of animal liberation, patriarchal rhetoric, nonverbal communication, women in theater, and theories of channeling. So we know about her political work with Harvey. We've heard that. And I have to say that she comes back to me in nighttime scenes of women howling at the moon, filling bowls of minstrel blood, dumping the old out, dropping teaching pearls on the floor. I remember all of us laughing hard, having visions of the utopian future, thinking new thoughts of women ruling the world having baby lesbians, eating peanut butter and crackers at meetings, always arguing about who is right and who is left, fighting the institutions with poetry, then marrying each other, being in demonstrations, shouting, painting our faces, stealing computer paper for each other. You, Sally, are the garlic cloves of the women's liberation movement, stinking and healthy, writing heroic stories, creating unheard of rituals, being King Lear to please each other, making way for new learners, new communities with purple robes, red scarves, old earrings, new paradigms, thinking of hugging and kissing and squeezing you, having flying orgasmic dreams of you, letting you into my heart. You changed my life forever.
Thank you. Next up is Lynn Mortensen, who will be reading a letter from Sally's vet, Hannah Eisenstein. And Lynn not only was one of Sally's great caretakers, but also caretaker of Sally's animals.
Hi, I don't know how to follow up that. So I'm just going to read Dr. Hannah's letter. Holly and I are very sorry that we could not be here to celebrate the well-lived life of our friend Sally. Sally and I met through her love and appreciation of animals. Franny and Franklin Hodge were the first of her animals friends that I met. I think she named them both after Frank Grassi. Sally and I shared many stories about Dr. Frank and the misadventures of her animals and his recurrent heroic efforts in saving them from themselves. She loved to tell about how she made Frank turn 12 shades of red when she referred to her partner as her lover back in the 80s. Of course, they came to love and respect each other, as everyone always did with both Sally and Frank. Sally, Jane, and the gang invited Holly and me to Thanksgiving dinner our first year here back in 2010 and made us feel welcome. It was Jane's last Thanksgiving. Those were strange, tired years when we were getting our legs underneath us and making friends. They embraced us and made us feel like part of the community. That warm reception was everything we needed. Morgan later made it possible for us to buy the house we live in. Later, we would spend evenings a couple of times a month at Jane's place, sharing food, stories, watching movies, and playing games with an ever-evolving cast of characters, many of whom became our friends. Some of the adventures Sally and I had included a house call to manage Franny's dietary indiscretion and resulting pancreatitis. Years later, I helped Franny escape her failing body when it was time. After treating Franklin Hodge for an abscess, he fled his carrier and jumped out the window of her car as she traveled home along Sherwood Road. Sally and I spent a few nights out there searching for old Franklin Hodge, and ultimately he was found about 4 months later with his e-collar still on. Later, when she was ready, I facilitated the adoption of Bodie, the infamous vehicle and cabin-eating dog. I think he consumed 3 of her vehicles, but it might just be 2. Her animals brought her joy, and this is where we connected. One time, after telling Sally a story about how I had handled a challenging family situation in which I attempted to undoubtedly fail to gracefully maneuver, she presented me with a stack of bumper stickers which she had made for me. I am a paragon of wisdom and maturity. Well, this had us in paroxysms of hysterical laughter, as most anyone who knows me knows I am not. In my mind's eye, the iconic Sally is holding her signature Laura Scudder's peanut butter sandwich on Wonder Bread in one hand and a Pepsi in the other, with a cigarillo smoking in an ashtray nearby. She told me I was her kind of trash, and I am. Hannah Eisenstein. And I just found this in Sally's jacket today. It's one of her quotes. The foolish run, the clever wait, and the wise go into the garden. So, this is for Sally. Okay.
Thank you so much, Lynn. And I really, watching Lynn take care of Sally was one of the sweetest things I've ever seen. So thank you so much, Lynn. We're now going to hear some music from 3 people, one of whom is Madge Strong, who is another one of the people that Sally made feel like they were best friends. That's true for a lot of us. They both loved music and played music and sang together a lot. So she's going to introduce the group, but Bonnie Gordon and Janet Rachel were both in Alternative Measures with Sally. So that was the quartet that she sang in. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Yes, I was one of the many people who Sally made feel like that I was her best friend, or at least a really, really good long-term friend. So she moved all of our hearts. When I read her book about the feminist future, and one of the main characters was a quadriplegic, and of course women, if they bonded their hearts, they could fly. But this character couldn't move very well. So at the beginning of one of the chapters was this quote, a little poem, and it said, "If you cannot fly into the arms of God, run. If you cannot run into the arms of God, walk. If you cannot walk into the arms of God, sit and attend. Her arms will find you." And that little home, was like, I need to write that into a song. So my new friends, Janet and Bonnie, are going to help sing this song.
If you cannot fly into the arms of God, run. If you cannot run into the arms of God, walk. If you cannot walk into the arms of God, sit and attend. Her arms will find you. If you cannot fly into the arms of God, run. If you cannot run into the arms of God, walk. If you cannot walk into the arms of God, sit and attend. Her arms will find you. Will find you. If you cannot fly into the arms of God, run. If you cannot run into the arms of God, walk. If you cannot walk into the arms of God, sit and attend. Her arms will find you, find you, will 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 find you.
Janet and Bonnie just learned that, and we have about a 5-minute rehearsal. And match. And similarly, kind of last minute, Friday, I think it was, I was reading a quote from Sally about how she didn't want people to mourn and weep at her memorial. She wanted us to sing and dance. And so I thought of that song that you all know. The old Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn? But I changed it a little bit. And then I came up with a few verses. So please sing along. Sally would have insisted on it.
Oh, people, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Oh, people, don't you weep, don't you mourn. The Sally spirit will live on. Oh, people, don't you weep. Oh, people, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Oh, people, don't you weep, don't you mourn. The Sally spirit will live on. Oh, people, don't you weep.
Sally spoke out loud and clear, led with courage, not with fear. Now it's our turn, Sally, we are here. Oh, people, don't you weep.
Oh, people, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Oh, people, don't you weep, don't you mourn. The Sally spirit will live on. Oh, people, don't you weep.
With a twinkle and a grin, all our hearts with Sally in. They are straight, women and men. Oh, people, don't you weep.
Oh, people, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Oh, people, don't you weep, don't you mourn. The Sally spirit will live on. Oh, people, don't you weep.
Down in SF she did fight for equal justice, equal rights. Let's carry on with all our might. Oh, people, don't you weep.
Oh, people, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Oh, people, don't you weep, don't you mourn. The Sally spirit will live on. Oh, people, don't you weep.
Here in the mountains, back to the land, all our friends gather hand in hand, sing and dance, now join the band. Oh, people, don't
don't you mourn. Oh, people, don't you weep, don't you mourn, 'cause Sally's spirit will live on. Oh, people, don't you weep. One more time in the chorus. Oh, people, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Oh, people, don't you weep, don't you mourn, 'cause Sally's spirit will live on. Oh, people, don't you weep.
Good dancing out there. That's just how I want it. Dance it. Thank you for that singing. Next up is my mom, Vivian Sotomayor Power, and Sally's one-time Spanish teacher, because she was ever the student, ever looking to learn.
So we are all Sally's best friends, all of us. That feels so good. So I wrote this poem, and it was pretty easy to write because all that I did was look at those cards that she got at her 90th birthday, and the messages there were so wonderful that I decided, I didn't decide it. They just came into the poem. Originally, we were going to do a collage of the cards, but I didn't want to break them or cut them or anything, so the collage is right here. Many of the things that are here have been things that you already have said, and you can hear echo in here. So, once there was a woman who celebrated the life of numerous pets, and when they died, made posters for each one of them, recording names, nicknames, birth and death dates, marking the graves of each dog, cat, and raccoon, who received birthday cards from dogs secretly written by their dog persons, whose poem, Meditations of Animals, in English and Spanish, Meditación por los Animales, about the suffering of non-human animals, notes what applies to them about the suffering of non-human animals, notes that what applies to them sadly often applies to human animals, who will stop the car at the side of roadkill, lovingly picking up the stiff body, carefully placing it safely on the side of the road for everlasting rest in peace, who firmly and resolutely forbade the cutting of trees, bushes, or even twigs around her place, or for that matter anywhere, who found the goddess in her own backyard, embodied in a huge, lusty, pink madrone. Once there was a woman who really was the world's best teacher, a title she conferred on me, hyperbolically speaking. She taught creatively and designed courses that never been taught before. She was a leader, empowering those around her to aim far and reach high. She influenced whole generations of women to explore new fields of study, like the feminist studies of religion. She created an inspirational rhetoric looking to replace the art of persuasion with the art of invitation. She transformed the concept of chairman and invented a neologism, chair dyke. Once there was a woman who was a visionary artist, an actor, a singer, a writer, a sculptor, a poet, who past her 90th birthday still recited from memory Shakespearean sonnets, Frost, The Road Less Taken, and gems like Carol's The Jabberwocky, who wrote in many styles and cultivated many genres, novels, stories, poems, essays on a variety of subjects, from Aristotelian logic to a feminist tarot, whose renowned pioneer novel, The Wonderground, is taught today to young college students who in my classroom recited from memory Cyrano de Bergerac's speech, No Thank You, in Spanish. Once there was a woman who knew how to bring joy to others. She had a special smile when in her later uninhibited years she would tell strangers, "You are my kind of trash." And she would find many who gladly wanted to join that club. She had a sense of humor, and she made people laugh. She also understood tragedy, and to those who had a loss, she would say, "Look at it as an opportunity." Once there was a woman, patron of animals and worshipper of nature. Once there was a woman, empowering the other. Once there was a woman, a great spinner, spinning stories of life. Once there was a woman guiding us to our inner sources of joy. Once, and not just once, but for all of us, in our memory and in our hearts, and always, there was a woman. Thank you.
Sorry, I love that so much, I forgot it was me up again. Next up is Deborah Craig, who teaches at San Francisco State University and is a filmmaker. She made the film A Wild Ride that features Sally. It's fabulous. And I have to say I'm so grateful to her for deciding to focus on Sally, and the work that she's done is amazing, and just giving Sally that attention that she so much deserves, and I'm just enormously grateful. So thank you, Deborah.
Hi everybody, and I am more accustomed to being on the other side of the camera, so and not always up in front here, but it's really great to see everybody. It's so wonderful to be outdoors on this beautiful day, out under the trees in the sky that Sally loved, and I'm a Berkeley girl, and one of the least sort of spiritual folks that I know, and I still kind of feel like maybe Sally's looking down on us, smiling or playing a little joke on us because we were trying to figure out if it was going to rain on us and all of our equipment and stuff like that. But I did want to say a few words here. I feel incredibly privileged to be have working on this project with Sally and to have met so many of you. I do think that I have a dubious distinction here. I'm probably one of the people who has known Sally for the least amount of time. There might be one or two who have known her for least, but I think I've only came into Sally's life about 7 years ago. So in the scheme of things, that is not very much time. I have, however, had the pleasure in the work that I've been doing and meeting friends of Sally's that go back 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, and more. And in fact, I talked to, this summer, we managed to interview Sally's old friend Adrian Tinsley, affectionately known as AT, and we were able to interview her. We did it remotely, so I was in Berkeley and she was in Denver, and we had a crew on the ground there. But AT met Sally when AT was 15 and Sally was 21, and Sally was her camp counselor. And so Sally apparently at this camp in Virginia, she specialized in theater and in riflery. Okay, so if anybody has pictures of Sally with a gun, let me know. We're on the lookout for those. So AT stayed in touch and had incredibly moving stories to tell about Sally, including just the electric thrill that went through her body when Sally put her hand on her shoulder. And remember, this is a woman who basically was having a memory of almost 70 years ago and still was the visceral memory of that connection. So what long friendships, what an incredible mark of a life well lived. What I've noticed from having the privilege of meeting so many of Sally's friends is also that she not only had many friends and long-term friends, but she helped create many lasting friendships. And I think some of those people are here right now, and as we interview people for the film, we've just heard story after story after Sally telling somebody, "Oh, Penny, you really need to meet Bonnie." Or, telling somebody, "Oh, Pan, you really need to meet Jean." And so, Sally was sort of sometimes out in front and, up at the podium herself, but she was always thinking, how can I connect this person with that person? They can work together. They would get along. They have some connection. And we often, my film crew and I often would drive up to Willits together, and our sound woman, Loretta, couldn't be here today, but one day we were talking about one of these stories of Sally connecting people, and she said, Sally was like LinkedIn way before there was LinkedIn. So again, people come back around to how prescient Sally was about so many things, but Sally constantly seemed to have that in her mind. How can I connect with this person, with that person? And not only had her own friendships that went on for decades, but spawned these friendships that went on for decades. And by the way, Sally also had an incredible gift, and I won't dwell on it because other people have said it. Sally had friends that were different from her. And this is a skill that we seem to have lost as a country, and we need to learn it very quickly. And I'm so happy Margie is here to tell her story about her friendship with Sally. I mean, Sally at one point was, defined herself as a lesbian separatist and had all these ideas about the importance of women separating out. And, I've talked to many friends of Sally who said, yes, separatism was a really important thing and how important that was. And then I've talked to other friends of Sally who said, Sally couldn't be separate from anybody. It was impossible for her. And if Marjorie hadn't been here to tell her story, her beautiful story so well, I would have told it myself, because it's such a perfect metaphor for the importance of knowing how to reach out to people who are different from ourselves and connecting through our humanity and learning from ourselves, and that sense of wanting human connection and curiosity about people who are different from ourselves. Instead of thinking you're bad for thinking that, I had the sense that Sally was just curious when people thought something different from her. And we need to learn that. Boy, myself, and I tell my students, I teach at San Francisco State, by the way, and I tell my students all the time, we need to get out of our own bubbles and learn how to have conversations with people who are different from ourselves. Thank you. So with Sally, it wasn't just people but places that were really important in her life. And I think one example is that Sally, moved to Texas in the 60s. Sally moved to San Francisco in the early 70s. So she spent, and then she spent, when she retired, she spent the rest of her life in Willits. But she's still, through all of that, I got the feeling, had a deep sense of an identification with being a Southerner. And she still had her Southern roots, and you've heard people here refer to her Southern accent, and she kind of had that Southern charm, and Bill said she just loved to play the Southern belle, and I have pictures to prove it. She was an awesome Southern belle, and I have a picture of her with a big broad-brimmed purple hat and a feather boa, so she had that identification. And in the film, maybe it's a pipe dream, but it really is our dream to go back to Virginia, to see where she came from. Okay, how did this woman who grew up in a small town, Pearisburg, Virginia, undergo sort of like a butterfly come out of a chrysalis and just kind of blossom and transform herself, and yet keep those roots. But the other thing about Sally's Southern roots is we're also interested, and I've heard from people what an impact that might have had on her lifelong concern about violence against animals, violence against other people, and violence against the earth. And is it possible that her Southern roots may have played an impact and played a role in that? Okay. The thing about Sally, and then Sally had this whole rich period in San Francisco that people have talked about, and we really hope the film will look at, in a way, Sally's heyday, where she was up there on the podium with Harvey Milk, and up there with the people that Corky mentioned, Nancy McDermott and Jane Gerko, helping co-create the Women's Studies program, and really up there in the forefront making change. And by the way, always making change with others. Okay, it was always, I had one message from Nancy McDermott, and it was, the message was this was a collective effort. Okay, but Willits was also such an important piece of Sally's life. And Sally spent the last 30 years of her life in Willits. It seemed like her sanctuary and her refuge from city life, and her refuge from the demands of teaching and the demands of activism and the demands of being everybody's best friend. I think that she loved that, and it took a toll on her, or at least took something out of her. So it was more Gain that she told. Yeah, I tell people I live in Northern California on a mountain of contradictions. Where she loved the spotlight that came with the camera and the sound woman, and Sally was so happy to see us and kind of enjoyed being the center of attention. Loved having the mic put on her because it kind of had to go down her shirt, And then she got tired, and so we would just say, you take a break. So I think she loved and thrived on that, being the center of attention, and also really needed her solitude, and Willits was the perfect place for her to be able to get both of those things. She had the land in Willits and was surrounded by so many of her important friends, many of whom are here. Jean and Mary, Susan and Diane, Penny and Bonnie, and then some who are not here with us today in Texas, Dorothy, Morgaine, and some who are no longer living, Jane. But I think that was really important to her. She had caregivers of people who have said who really stepped up and not only took care of her physical needs, but became a part of her community when she needed them. And she had her community of yoga folks and improv folks. So she really had this, broad and diverse community reflected in this crowd of all the different kinds of people. Her Spanish teacher, her yoga teacher, her fellow Abraham aficionados, who all, kind of stepped up and filled that role in her life. Another anecdote that I think is really telling. I've just finished up with a few anecdotes that I think are really telling. One is that I think it was last year, Sally fell and she broke her hip, and I heard that she had pneumonia, and maybe that's why she fell, and she was in the hospital with pneumonia and a broken hip. And I'm in public health, and just anybody would worry, and I'm in public health, and I was like, oh boy, that is really, really worrisome. I was really concerned. I was going back and forth with Vivian and Leo, and should I come up? Is it too much for her? And then about a week later, I had a conversation where I heard that Sally was feeling a little bit better, and she was flirting up a storm with the nurses, and I'm like, oh, I think she's going to be okay. So again, she just, this incredible urge to connect and power of creating human connections, I think is something that I look at as her she has all these accomplishments. Like, she kicked Briggs's ass in a KQED debate, okay, and had this incredible intellect and gravitas, and this incredible sense of humor, and this incredible desire to connect with everybody she encountered. In fact, even Briggs, we've heard Sally getting famous from saying, if I'm up here fighting the Briggs Initiative, and if Briggs were here right now, what would I do to him? And everybody's like, yeah, we were gonna, punch him out. She said, I would give him a big kiss on the lips, okay? Because that's what we should do with the people that we have disagreements, is argue with them and embrace them somehow if we can, okay? So now I also want to acknowledge Lonnie Ka'aumanu, who couldn't be here today. Unfortunately, she came to be here and she wasn't feeling well and had to head home, and she was going to speak, and she was also, like Corky and like Robin Song, a student of Sally's, and just really important. Sally was really important in her life and transformation, and she was very important in Sally's life and transformation, and just came regularly and religiously to be with Sally and help care for Sally at the end of her life. So I wanted to acknowledge Sally, Alani in that way, because she couldn't be here. And I also wanted to finish with a wonderful anecdote from Lonnie, and I hope she'll forgive me for telling it, because she can't be here. And I don't know if she was going to say it in here. So she said, and I'm sorry if I have the details wrong, but she basically was coming up to visit Sally, and maybe she hadn't been to the cabin before, and Sally was worried she'd get lost in the woods, which happens to all of us city girls like me. So she told Alani, meet me in the produce aisle at the Safeway, okay? Which is really strange, because Sally doesn't really eat produce, right? So I don't know why she told her to meet her in the produce aisle in the Safeway, but Lonnie dutifully agreed to meet her in the produce aisle at the Safeway, and she did, and she saw her at one end of the aisle, and Sally was at the other end of the aisle, so Sally, of course, yelled at the top of her lungs and was waving and flagging down Lonnie at the top of her lungs. And then not only did she meet Lonnie, but they didn't swiftly head out to the cabin. They proceeded to spend a great deal of time in that Safeway, roving up and down probably just about every aisle in the Safeway, while Sally introduced Lonnie to almost every single person in the store. Primarily, I think, the people who worked there at the Safeway, but also friends and acquaintances of Sally that happened to be in the store at the time. So to me, that was an incredibly beautiful parable about friendship and community. And that also, what a beautiful mark of a life well lived.
Thank you, Deborah, so much. We are on number 14 out of 18, so you have some idea where we're going here. Next up is Bonnie Gordon and Penny Savloff. Bonnie was in alternative measures with Sally for 15 years. She's also a land partner. And Penny met Sally through Aikido and is also a land partner. So welcome.
And I'm Bonnie. And we're going to read two pieces that were sent by Sally's half-brother, Louis, who couldn't be here today and who still lives in Virginia. I'm going to read the first piece, and then Penny's going to read one. Oh, Sister Sal, where do I begin? Many of you that know Sally realize she had a half-brother back in Southwest Virginia, where Sally's life began. We didn't have a typical sister-brother relationship, since Sally was 17 years my senior. I was born in April 1948, and she graduated from Parisburg High School in June of that year. Then it was off to Sweetbriar College for her bachelor's degree, Bowling Green for her master's, and finally the University of Illinois for her doctorate. During those college years, I remember only seeing my sister at Christmas break and for short periods of time in the summers. She always came home with her Pall Mall cigarettes and Pepsi Colas. But what I'll never forget, although Sally wasn't renowned for her cooking expertise, was how I always looked forward to her killer chocolate pie with a graham cracker crust, and she let me lick the pan. It was this time of our relationship that I pinned the name Sal Bug, which stuck for the rest of her life. After her college years, Sally's visits to her conservative home place became more and more infrequent, although she stayed in constant contact with our mother and grandmother. I remember she came home for our grandmother's funeral and later to sit with our mother when she was hospitalized, and then Sally soon returned for our mother's funeral. I distinctly remember Sally visiting my wife and me when our children were young. She pulled up in the driveway in her 1960 VW Vanagon with her fur baby Brindle in tow. I awoke the next morning and looked out our bedroom window. What did I behold but Sally dangling from a maple tree branch by her legs, with Brindle right by her side. But my most memorable time with Sally was my last time with her. A good friend of mine drove a bike van across country from Virginia Beach to meet up with friends that had biked across country. We took the southern route in order to come up the coast from San Francisco to Portland so that we could pass through Willits and spend some time with Sally. Although we were with Sally only 24 hours, I will never forget that time. I got to meet all her dear friends at dinner. Afterwards, as we strolled into the woods to her beloved cabin, I held her hand. Sally looks at me and says, "It's been a long time since I held hands with a man." Later that night, we sat up until the wee hours of the morning solving all the world's problems, or at least delineating them. Just before we turned in, Sally said to my friend, "Are you sure you two aren't a couple?" Before we left the next day, Sally sat on my lap on the porch and wanted to know all about my children and grandchildren. This was 5 years ago, but I had this strange feeling as we kissed goodbye and my friend and I started down the driveway that Sally and I would not see each other again. Rest in peace, Sal Bug.
And Louis sent another story, an amusing story, he called it, and asked that it be read. I just remembered a very amusing story, a Sally story. Sally went through a stage in her college years where she was into sculpting, so she asked my mother to take headshots of me from all different angles so that she could make a bust. At the same time, she sculpted the hands of a friend of hers and made them into bookends. When she came home on the train for Christmas that year with her 2 completed projects on board. When the train pulled into Parisburg Station, she got off the train and immediately went to the baggage car and was with a one of the attendants there was literally throwing baggage off the train onto the loading dock. Sally quickly ran up to the conductor and yelled emphatically, "Sir, please be careful with those 2 boxes. I have my friend's hands in one and my brother's head in the other." You know, I just want to say, that we've been talking about Sally connecting through great differences, and Marge's story was so moving about 2 open hearts being able to meet through living in very different worlds. It's not just that they connected, there was joy in their connection. And you know, her brother lived where his whole life where Sally left. And they connected, and he got a kick out of her.
So I was at a birthday party, and it was the 50th birthday party for Susan Leo. It was the 60th birthday party for Jane Gurko, and the 70th birthday party for Sally Gearhart. Anybody else at that party who's here? Good, yes. And at that party, I remember seeing Sally, who was gorgeously dressed with a scarf and just looked beautiful. And I remember her dancing with this young woman who I asked who that was. They said she was 16 years old and a friend. And Sally led her around the dance floor magnificently. I mean, it was just so impressive. Here's that young woman, Jade.
There I was raising my hand saying, I was at that party. Sally came into my life when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and I think the story goes that she saw me dropping a bag of trash off in a dumpster. You know, someone else mentioned a story about bringing trash into town to drop it off, and she said, "Who is that little girl?" And she entirely transformed my world and my sister's world. I simply would not be who I am today if it were not for Sally, period. Like so many of us, I have a treasure chest full of memories and stories that speak to her singular wit and imagination, her porous openness to wonder, and a generosity of spirit that exemplified again and again the deep wisdom that we are in fact comprised of the substance of our relations and not of the self we attach to material objects. In my mind's eye, I see Sally standing firm like her teachers, the trees, staking a position, a politics, an indisputable truth, waiting for the rest of us to get with the program. I have many of these stories and reflections, both intimate and grand, but one of the things that most linked Sally and I was our shared love of, and at times impatience with, the theater. It is Sally, the theater person, Sally, the performer, that I wish to reflect on here today. Sally nurtured me as a young theater artist, taking it upon herself to expose to me what she deemed classics, to teach me iambic pentameter, calling me out on cheap tricks, and telling me story after story of her formative years working as a professional actor. On the eve of my departure for university study, she even arranged for me to travel to New York for a week under the tutelage of her longtime friend and theater artist so that I might take in for the first time all that Broadway had to offer. Many years later, via a set of strange circumstances and a story that had Sally's fingerprints all over it in big and small ways, I completed a PhD in theater. To this day, outside of my colleagues, the only other person I know with a PhD in theater is Sally Miller Gearhart. I now work as a professor of performance studies, where I spend a lot of time with theater makers and a lot of time thinking about what performance does in the world, how it makes worlds, and how it makes selves, on stage and in everyday life. I teach young people who find their way to theater, to dance, to storytelling, with their bodies because they are drawn to how it sparkles and shines, but also because they are often people who our society has told are simply too much and at the same time not enough. And in the collectivity and capacious embrace of creative collaboration, they are healed, remade, given a space for imagining and embodying their wildest, tenderest selves. Theater has always been for the queers and the freaks, the genius misfits and the misbehaved and the rejects, a place where the heightened affect we all feel within us is welcomed, not punished. Theater tells us we must play, for that is how we discover. As I tell my students, theater does not, in fact, just hold a mirror to society to reflect it. It actualizes entire worlds and ways of being. Sally was a theater maker and was also made by theater. And although she put the words and stories of what we can recognize today, and as she surely did, horribly heteropatriarchal, racist, classist dramatists, she used the theater, used performance to slip away from a world that would have her erase herself, stuffed into the oblivion of a closet. She sang herself into being, eyes opened wide and lips poised at just the right angle, long legs lifted to the sky, propelled by the magic of knowing you take a world of spectators with you into a different dimension of feeling and being. Today, we hear strands of a centuries-old anti-theatrical prejudice, as Sally would tell us, back to Plato's story of the cave and his mistrust for representation, in the ways the word performance is used to imply a kind of fakery, a falseness. Indeed, we do live in a world plagued by disinformation and untruths peddled as gospel, and yet it is not performance itself that is at fault. Performance does not fake. It actualizes. It actualizes the lying, lazy activism perhaps, just as it actualizes the truth-telling. And as the linguist J.L. Austin posited, and later the gender theorist Judith Butler would expand, we do not exist outside of performance, but rather it is the doing that makes the thing itself. We are made in the moment again and again, through embodiment giving lasting life to the past, but only insofar as it can exist in the present. Sally knew that and lived it. All the stories today are a reflection of this. It means everything that Sally Miller Gearhart was an actor and a performer, a maker of theatrical worlds. As a rhetorician, she worked to reframe the masculinist violence of the art of persuasion into the more egalitarian and feminist art of invitation. And in this offering, yes, this invitation, I see Sally the player. Sally showing us other worlds, other possible ways, inviting us to play with her. Thank you. And next, we'll have a song from Diane Circle, her neighbor. Thank you.
So many good words here today. Raise your hand if you ever had the opportunity to sing with Sally. I know, singers, we love you. How many of you ever experienced the forced sing-along of old-time fundamentalist hymns with Sally and Jane? Oh yes, it was a special joy where we would come together. There would be an adamant, this is our repertoire, this is what we sing, and it was the old power in the blood, the sticky, sticky blood. And it harkened back to Sally's upbringing. But there's a song that we used to sing that was one of the favorites. I know many of you will know the refrain, and so I invite you to sing it with me. It's In the Garden. And it was one that, you know, as Sally lost her hearing, she could really bellow it out. So I really invite you all to bellow it out for Sally, for all of us. I come to the garden alone, where the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the joy of God discloses. And she walks with me, and she talks with me, and she tells me I am her own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. She speaks, and the sound of her voice is so sweet, the birds hush their singing, and the melody that she gave to me within my heart is ringing. And she walks with me, and she talks with me, and she tells me I am her own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. We love you, Sally.
Vivian's coming up. We're going to do a little thing, a letter from Nancy McDermott. Sorry. And Nancy McDermott was our dean. And the whole time I was at San Francisco State, she was the dean. And I have some photographs that I'm going to put on the Humane Society table so you all can go over and donate, which I know you're going to do. But look at this envelope because it's full of some pictures from Jane Gurko's retirement party. And there's also some pictures of alternative measures who performed at Jane Gurko's retirement party. But Nancy McDermott is this person here, so you get a closer look if you go over and look. But so this is something that was written by Sally, and it has one of her little drawings, if any of you know that little drawing that she does on a lot of things. So it's called The Dean. You will be working for a highly creative, egalitarian woman. Your needs do not come first. No faculty member's needs come first. Even the president's needs don't come first. Priority goes to the student who wants a key to the phone booth. Dean Catching, this is her advice. Staff and faculty of the School of Humanities have become adept at this fine art. It is possibly the greatest challenge you will meet as a new member of the School of Humanities. All will testify that it takes time to perfect this skill, unless you happen to have a talent for spotting elusive prey. In fact, a birdwatching background is highly recommended as prerequisite for this activity because the dean is busy all over campus, and because she is so available to those in need, The best way to catch her is to lie in wait, which is to say, number one, take up your position in the black chair inside the doorway of HLL 237 at least 15 minutes before you must see her. Assume as inconspicuous an air as you can so that your intentions will not be discerned until it's too late. Bring sustenance, food, drink, munchies. Avoid desserts, as they are messy, and in fact, be sure your edibles and drinkables are quickly concealable, since the dean likes to keep the workplace free of foodstuffs. Also, supply yourself with some portable work, so you can use your time auspiciously while you await the dean. Keep your eyes and ears open wide to catch her office door opening. She often sneaks in by the hallway door. To pick up the sounds of her voice down the hallway, to thrill to the sound of her footfalls approaching. Note, do not confuse hers with Betty Metzger's footfalls. She was chair of journalism. There have been some embarrassing moments in the office when Metzger was mistakenly assaulted. At the instant she comes into sight, jump up and bleat out, 5 minutes, Nancy, just 5 minutes. A frantic waving of arms to stop her in mid-flight, and a look of desperation on your face will grab at her heart and force her attention on you. Some have found that a simple, I need you, can trigger ancient patterns in her Protestant psyche and command her attention quickly. The minute she stops, sees you, and says, well, don't hesitate. Hook her any way you can and fast. No further advice offered here, since each of us in the school has developed his or her own way to do this. So you're all on your own from here on in. But be aware that once you've got her, she'll give you more than 5 minutes. And every second of it will be worth an hour of the ordinary male dean's time. It is worth it. We highly recommend the dean catching practice. That's Nancy.
So I have here a letter from the dean, Nancy McDermott. But before I go into reading these, I want to say one more anecdote of Sally. At the time that she was at San Francisco State as the coordinator of the women's department, the women's studies department, in another university, another world there was a fraternity of guys that felt that they could sing these songs about a woman having holes and the men using them, etc., etc. And then the woman dies, and they still do it. Anyway, it was a horrible fraternity song. So the administration of that university, I think it was the University of Santa Clara, called them and said, you can't do that. These are the 70s, okay, early 70s. So they were called and said, you cannot do that. Meanwhile, at San Francisco State, there's this lady that hears about them, and so she invited the guys to come to San Francisco State, to the Women's Studies Department, to talk about it. Let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation about that. So they came, and apparently, it went very well. the guys didn't apologize, and I'm sure that those guys really learned a lesson from Sally. So here I'm saying this because one of the things that Nancy is mentioning here is that she tried to break barriers. And I think that, that was one barrier that the Women's Studies Department invited boys from a fraternity from another university to have a conversation. That wasn't too common. But Sally made that. So here is when Nancy learned that Sally had died, she wrote this. She didn't write it for a memorial or anything, she just wrote it. And this is what she said. My memories of Sally. From the moment she joined our speech faculty in 1973, I knew Sally Gearhart as an influence, a presence, a force. Long before I knew Sally as my good friend, she brought women together, teaching us to unspeak, to confront our uncertainties, to give voice to some of our dreams. She was one of the builders of the degree program in Women's Studies. She participated in the endless meetings, agreeing, disagreeing, listened to. She was the designer and teacher of many courses, the mentor of students, the role model for faculty. She created big networks, helping the entire campus and our professional organization to enlarge circles, tear down barriers, enrich curriculum, and work together. Women, men, members of LGBTQ and cisgender communities, racially and cultural diverse groups. She brought many of us into her workspace and life space, helping us to lean on each other, listen, laugh, love. Years ago, Marge Piercy, the poet, wrote a poem called The Token Woman. The token woman gleams like a gold molar in a toothless mouth. The token woman arrives like a milk bottle on the stoop, coming full and departing emptied. Sally Gearhart was often the token woman as she helped us turn our silence into language and to tap our wells of joy and power. She was an influence, a presence, she was a force. Nancy McDermott, College of Humanities, 1965-2002, and Dean, 1979-2002. Thank you.
We made it! Woohoo! And she walks with me. The story goes on. Those of us here, as well as those far and wide, are charged with carrying on Sally's legacy and her commitment to love and invitation. She had one more thing that she wanted us to hear. This is from when Sienna, who was, again, one of the most fantastic caregivers of this fantastic caregiving team. When Sienna asked Sally to reflect on dying a few years ago, she took a spin on the Requiem by Robert Louis Stevenson. It's very short, trust me. And she recited this, and I compared it with the original, and there was some she just, on the fly, she made it her own. And on Friday night, this is what we did. Beneath the wide and starry sky, fling my ashes and let them fly. Glad did I live and probably gladly die. And I laid me down with a will. This be the verse you carve for me. Here she flies where she loved to be. Home is the sailor home from the sea, and the shepherd home from the hill. Well, Sally, our Sally, is home. And now we go forth from this place to love and do good work. And if you ever have a Pepsi, think of her.